I can't promise that it will ever save their lives, but nothing you will ever do is more important than teaching integrity to your children. There's an old saying, those who do can, and those who can't teach. But you really can't teach honesty unless you are honest yourself. You really can't teach integrity unless you also live with integrity. It's actually quite simple. It might be tempting, for the sake of consistency, to assert that you should always tell the whole truth exactly as you see it in every situation. But I've lived long enough in the real world to know things just aren't that simple. When you're in a leadership position, whether it's in a business or as the head of a family, honesty and integrity are not as important as money or shelter or a telephone. Honesty and integrity are infinitely more important than any of those things. They're about as important as having air and food and water. For a leader, honesty and integrity are absolutely essential to survival. A lot of business people don't realize how closely they're being watched by their subordinates. Remember when you were a kid in grammar school, how you used to sit there staring at your teacher all day? By the end of the school year, I'll bet you could have done a perfect imitation of all your teacher's mannerisms. I'll bet you were aware of the slightest nuances in your teacher's voice, all the little clues that distinguished levels of meaning, that told you the difference between bluff and now I mean business. You were able to do that after 8 or 9 months of observation. Suppose you had 5 or 10 years. Do you think there would have been anything about your teacher you didn't know? As a manager, there probably isn't anything your people don't know about you right this minute. If you haven't been totally above board and honest with them, it's certain you haven't gotten away with it. But if you've been led to believe that you've gotten away with it, it's most likely because people are afraid of you. That's a problem in its own right. But there's another side of the coin, too. In any organization, people want to believe in their leaders. If you give them reason to trust you, they're not going to go looking for reasons to think otherwise. And they'll be just as perceptive about your positive qualities as they are about the negative ones. I heard a story of a situation that happened some time ago at a company in the Midwest. The wife of a new employee experienced complications in the delivery of a baby. There was a medical bill of more than $10,000, and the health insurance didn't want to cover it. The employee hadn't been on the payroll long enough. The pregnancy was a pre-existing condition, one thing or another. In any case, the employee was desperate. He approached the company CEO and asked him to talk to the insurance people. The CEO agreed, and the next thing the employee knew, the bill was gone. The charges were rescinded. But when he mentioned to some colleagues the way the CEO had so readily used his influence with the insurance company, they just shook their heads and smiled. The CEO had paid the bill out of his own pocket, and everybody knew it, no matter how quietly it had been done. An act of dishonesty can't be hidden, and it will instantly undermine the authority of a leader. But an act of integrity is just as obvious to all concerned. When you're in a leadership position, you have the choice of how you will be seen, but you will be seen one way or the other. Make no mistake about that. Leadership of a family demands even higher standards of honesty and integrity. And the stakes are higher too. You can replace disgruntled employees and start over. You can even get a new job for yourself if it comes to that. But your family can't be shuffled like a deck of cards. If you haven't noticed, kids are great moral philosophers, especially as they get into adolescence. They're determined to discover and expose any kind of hypocrisy, phoniness, or lack of integrity on the part of authority figures. And if we're parents, that means us. It's frightening how unforgiving kids can be about this. But it really isn't a conscious decision on their part. It's just a necessary phase of growing up. They're testing everything, especially parents. In Arthur Miller's great play, Death of a Salesman, it's hard to believe that a son would so completely lose faith in his father based on a single incident of dishonesty. Once a parent has lost moral authority, it is very, very difficult to regain it. Studies have shown that children are extremely understanding about many things. If you accidentally step on a favorite toy, that will quickly be forgiven, if not forgotten. If you lose your job and the family has to move, they'll adjust. If parents just can't get along and decide to divorce, most kids can handle it, but they can't handle dishonesty. It can take many, many years before that will be forgiven.
A leader is any person who realizes the importance of becoming a bigger and better person with the passing every day, week, and month. A leader takes the responsibility of his or her own growth, a planner, a thinker, a doer. Each of us can become such a leader in our own area of activity. It's not difficult, and in the long run it's easier for us and on us than what at first may appear to be the easier of two courses. All businesses, all organizations, from the smallest to the very largest, need a leader. The overall company and each of its divisions must have strong and able leadership. Contrary to popular belief, you do not raise morale in an organization. It filters down from the top. The attitudes of the people working in any organization always reflect the attitude of the leader. And finally, this leader will always be found to be just one person. The man or woman on the white horse. I'm sure you're aware that even the largest and oldest companies with many thousands of employees and hundreds of management people will, when they find themselves in trouble or not doing as well as they should, seek out one person and place him or her in the position of final authority. The whole company, the board of directors, and perhaps thousands of stockholders all look to this one person for leadership and success. Wherever you find a successful, going concern, whether it's a gas station, a supermarket, a school club, PTA, or a well-organized home, you'll find behind its success an outstanding leader. This is the most valuable person in society. In industry, he or she makes the wheels turn, the entire economy work. This is the person who's been responsible for the growth of nations and their position in the world. The employer of millions, the dreamer, the planner, and a clock to him or her is something that other people watch. You'll find this person working early and late, and when not working, he or she is usually thinking and planning. The best way for you to develop the security that lasts a lifetime is to become outstanding at one particular line of work. Look at it this way. Regardless of economic ups and downs, the industry of which that line of work is a part will continue to operate. It won't shut down completely. As long as you're in the top 5% of the people in that industry, you know you'll always be in demand. You'll be wanted and needed, not just where that industry is concerned, but where you and your family are concerned. The man or woman who becomes truly outstanding at what he or she does has the world on a string. Here's the person of confidence and peace of mind. Here's the person who's quietly aware of his or her ability and intimate knowledge of his or her job in particular industry. Here's the homemaker or student who's at the top of the group. They've got it made, and they and everybody else know it. Ask yourself this question. Am I now such a person? Down deep inside, you know the answer. If you answered yes, you're among the most fortunate people and in one of the smallest and most elite groups on earth. If your answer was no, it can be turned into a yes in a surprisingly short time. The first step is to make one really big and important decision. It's a decision the great majority of people never make and suffer as a result. Failing to make this decision keeps a person from ever really getting on course or clarifying his or her goals. If you make the decision, you can take a deep breath, give a comfortable sigh of relief, fix your eyes firmly upon your target, and go to work relaxed, comfortable, and sure in the knowledge that the success you seek will be yours. The great steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, when asked the formula for success, answered, "Put all your eggs in one basket, and then watch that basket." It has to be that way. Anyone who'll be honest with himself or herself realizes that He or she has been happiest and most satisfied after having successfully completed a difficult job. A leader is a person who can help and lead others. It's the conscientious mother who wants her children to grow up knowing the rules for success and happiness. It's the father who shows by example that any job worth doing is worth doing. It's the student who studies to learn, not just to get a grade, who has a mind of his or her own and sets the pace for his or her fellow students. It's the farmer whose farm sets an example in his area, and the small businessman or woman whose business continues to grow and prosper with the passing years. It's the employee who has the good sense to realize that one gets most out of any job by giving loyalty and dedication to the firm that pays his or her wages.
As a person of integrity yourself, you'll find it easy to teach integrity to your kids, and they in turn will find it easy to accept you as a teacher. This is a great opportunity and also a supreme responsibility, because kids simply must be taught to tell the truth, to mean what they say, and to say what they mean. There was something interesting about the Indians of the Southwest and the skills they felt were important for their children to know. Hiding was one of them. In a desert environment where you would think there was nowhere at all to hide except possibly by squeezing yourself behind a cactus plant, the Indian children could literally disappear. And running was another very important ability. Beginning as young as 6 or 7 years of age, Indian children were taught to run long distances while holding a mouthful of water in order to develop breath control. And of course, both running and hiding were skills that could save the life of an Indian child, as well as preserve the security of the group. Kids today must be taught skills that will save their lives. And integrity is one of those vitally important skills. Maybe it's hard to convince yourself of that. Shakespeare wrote of one of his characters, "Every man has his fault, and honesty is his. He is more honest than wise." There is a difference between blowing hot air and premeditated dishonesty. How can you tell the difference? Your gut feelings will tell you. By the time we reach adulthood, I think most of us have extremely accurate ethical barometers built into our heads and hearts. We may choose to ignore what that ethical barometer tells us, but it's there nonetheless. When you're in a leadership role, I believe there's at least one situation in which you're almost always justified in stretching the truth to some degree. And here it is. You should overstate your degree of enthusiasm for your employees' work. You may use many carrots and very few sticks. Your recipe for dealing with subordinates should include at least 3 parts praise for every 1 part of criticism. Will this stretching of the truth cost you respect? I don't think so. Will a little sugarcoating of your true feelings foster greater productivity, better work, and improved morale? Absolutely. And that conclusion is supported by a great deal of behavioral science research. Praise is one of the world's most effective teaching and leadership tools. Criticism and blame, even if deserved, are counterproductive unless all other approaches have failed. It often brings out the best in people, and it's the grease that keeps the machine of human interactions functioning smoothly. So honesty is the best policy. We all know people who have gotten ahead as a result of dishonest or unethical behavior. When you're a kid, you think that never happens. But when you get older, you realize that it does. Then you think you've really wised up, but that's not the end of it. When you get older, you see the long-term consequences of dishonest gain, and you realize that it doesn't pay in the end. I've seen people who have made millions with questionable business tactics, and I've also seen a higher percentage of health problems among those people than any insurance actuary could possibly account for. I've seen people who decided to sell out their friends or their business partners in order to cash a big check, and those people wind up looking 20 years older than their age. Stick around, keep your eyes open, and I think you'll see it's true. Hope of dishonest gain is the beginning of loss. That's another old saying. I don't think it refers to the loss of money. I think it means loss of self-respect. You can have all the material things in the world, but if you've lost respect for yourself, what have you really got? The only way to ever attain success and enjoy it is to achieve it honestly and with pride in what you've done.
Just learning that better than 90% of the people in the country do not achieve real financial competence or security during their lives gives each of us, as head of his family, or at least co-head, the responsibility to make certain that we are in that small percentage of people who do. As George Bernard Shaw said one time, it is the duty of every man, the first duty of every man, is not to be poor. As it is written in the nature of man, freedom must be gained specifically against the obstacles and the convictions to which we're constantly exposed. And two, achieving financial security is an excellent exercise in creative imagination. Considering the effects of unrelenting inflation and assuming that they will continue in the future as they have in the past, estimate how much money you think you and your spouse will need as income to live as you want to live, the time you pick for retirement. Now, if you want to go along with age 65, that's fine, but maybe you'd like to be financially set before that time. At any rate, pick the year and the income you want to be receiving by that time. You know what Social Security benefits are now, and they'll probably increase, but only along with inflation in the future. And you want the income coming in, whether you're in a condition to work or not, ideally. You want a form of income that does not depend upon your personal services. Now, you know how much you want coming in, and you know the year in which you want it to be there. Your problem is defined. And it's said that a problem defined is half solved. Let's say, too, that you yearn for the simple, uncluttered life. Maybe a small, attractive place in Florida or Southern California or Hawaii or maybe Costa Rica or the coast of Spain with a sailboat and the rest of your life to spend wearing an old pair of Levi's and a sports shirt and sneakers. Sound good? Well, it's quite within the realm of possibility. It's a game any number can play. Most people just don't imagine that it's possible, so they remove themselves from competition. Here's one excellent formula to use in helping your imagination come up with the idea that best fits your particular likes and talents. First, the problem or opportunity. Problems are unsolved opportunities. Then assess your education, your background, your qualifications. What do you do best? You may want to go right on doing it, but at the same time invest your money in something calculated to give you excellent prospects for growth. As our friend suggests in his book, Squeeze the Ego Until It Grins, you might want to invest in good real estate, perhaps Florida real estate. Then when you're ready to retire, you can live off your income and just watch your investments. See, with $10,000, you can leverage, $50,000, maybe $100,000 in real estate. When it grows to $100,000, you can leverage maybe $1 million or $500,000. With $1 million, you can leverage $10 million. If you're not interested in real estate, remember that each year most people spend 90% or more of their income on products and services. The country's business firms do the same thing. What can you do to earn enough out of all of those many billions of dollars spent every month to live the way you and your spouse want to live? Set aside an hour a day to invest in solving your future financial needs. I recently visited a friend who lives in a beautiful home in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He brought out a dozen fine and large, beautiful color photographs of his home and grounds, shots from every angle. There were aerial views showing his home situated on the waterway. We commented on how great they were, and he told us that they'd been taken by a man in a small helicopter who had taken them without my friend's knowledge or permission. He had paid about $200 for the set, and they were well worth the money. If he used them only in case he wanted to sell his house, they'd be worth many times what he paid for them. But in the meantime, they were great, framed in his family room and in his office. A person could make an excellent income doing no more than photographing homes, and if he happened to like living in Florida and flying around in a helicopter, he'd have an agreeable business indeed. It was an imaginative and successful enterprise for a person who likes and is good at photography. Actually, the photographer could be hired while the entrepreneur simply called on the owners of the homes and sold the sets of pictures. But there are thousands of ideas just as good and not nearly so imaginative. Opportunities go with problems. Violent crimes have increased more than 90% in the last 5 years. Violent juvenile crimes have increased 167% in the last 10 years, according to an article from the Los Angeles Times Service written by David Shaw and Bill Hazlett. We all are sickened by what we read every day in the papers and see on television. What can we do about it? Well, there isn't much the average family can do to change the national situation, other than lead honest and exemplary lives themselves. But the average family can make certain that its home is as safe as money and good judgment can make it. I'd guess that 90% of American homes are ill-protected against criminal marauders. Any thief or psychopath can enter the average home with ridiculous ease in minutes, and they do every day. And that's because practically all builders put cheap junk where there should be excellent first-class hardware on doors and windows. A good hardware is available. You can find it on the really fine, expensive, custom-built home, but most people don't know about it. Practically all families can afford and would gladly pay for such hardware if someone would bring it to their homes and show it to them, displayed perhaps in an attractive case, along with a sales book showing the rate of increase of crime in the country, with newspaper clippings of robberies, rapes, and murders going on every day. The man of the house could install the hardware himself, or he could pay extra for your installer to do it for him. And not just for the doors, but for every window in the house. You know, there's window hardware that locks with a key, and which prevents a window from being opened more than is needed for ventilation. As soon as the would-be intruder finds it difficult to enter, as soon as he realizes he's up against first-class prevented hardware instead of the dime-store junk he's used to, you'll move on to easier pickings. Such hardware could be sold in any sizable community. In order to get it for my own home, I had to go to a great deal of trouble, do extensive research, make a couple of trips, and make dozens of phone calls. Whatever it is you have a knack for, or like very much to do, there's a way to turn it to substantial profit and financial independence. But it takes something that not one person in 1,000 will seriously tackle. It takes thought, time set aside for serious thought. Judge Learned Hand once wrote, "That we never see, save through a grass darkly, and that at long last we shall succeed only so far as we continue to undertake the intolerable labor of thought, that most distasteful of all our activities. But hard as it is, distasteful as it may be, we need only do it until we've solved our own particular problem, and we solve our own particular problem by being of service to others. They have everything we want, and will gladly share it with us, as we've said before, if we'll help them solve their problems. As we mature in our adult lives, our income should meet our thoughtful requirements. By establishing quality and simplicity as the guidelines of our lives, the income necessary to live a very good, full life can be surprisingly small. It should meet our qualifications, whatever they are, and that's our business. And any person can see to it that he has the income he wants all the years of his life and lives where he would like most to live. The number of business executives and managers who wind up behind the financial 8-ball should be something of a source of amazement to us all. They're professional problem solvers who find they can't solve one of life's most important problems. They're usually good organizers, good leaders, good thinkers, and decision-makers. At least they're supposed to be. And when they find themselves living marginal lives on incomes representing only the barest fraction of what they're used to, they should be able to come up with the appropriate answers to their problems. If necessary, they can organize an entirely new business firm, providing some sort of needed product or service. With their experience and training, with all that time on their hands, such an endeavor should have every chance of success. However, should it fail, they'll probably be no worse off than before, and they can try again. It will also give them something exciting to fill their time, keep them in the swim of things. You know, Henry Ford was pushing 50 when he got started in the automobile business. A friend of mine started a brand new company when he was 65 and watched it grow during his lifetime to a $300 million a year institution. In fact, following retirement, it's quite possible for a person to do much better than he did during his regular working career. Today, millions live in crowded, crime-ridden, polluted cities only because of habit and the failure to use their imaginations. You'll hear people say, but what if everybody suddenly pulled up stakes and took off to some sunny, agreeable place to live? That's a ridiculous comment. The fact is that not everybody will. Everybody can, but everybody won't. If more people would, we'd see a more rapid decentralization of industry and a resulting better distribution of what's now a fairly stable population. The big, ugly cities grew on old trade routes, at a time when transportation was limited to water and surface, mostly wagon and then rail transportation. Today, with air and truck transportation what it is, only a few major heavy industries remain near deep-water ports and near supplies of cheap fuel for power. The best estimates today indicate that all known reserves of fossil fuels will be depleted in 150 years, with the fusion process now only a matter of time, and with the deuterium supplies and seawater good for at least 1 billion years at a fraction of the present cost of coal and oil, and with practically no dangerous waste products, we're on the brink of a world revolution of ample power for all of the world's people. Moreover, with decentralization of our population away from the crowded cities, we live on 2% of the land, most of us, the industries and businesses which remain can transform those cities into clean, beautiful places in which to live. If you're interested in what can be done to make ugly cities beautiful, send for a marvelous lecture by Victor Gruen entitled Downfall and Rebirth of City Cores on Both Sides of the Atlantic. Gruen has a plan for redeveloping cities that won him the prize for architecture of the city of Vienna. He says on both sides of the Atlantic, and in fact in all nations of the world, we're presently hell-bent on destroying the environmental qualities of our cities, on spreading them out endlessly into thinly populated suburban regions, and in doing so, destroying every chance for vital, dynamic, multifunctional, meaningful centers. We have succeeded in making the urban environment unlivable and unworkable. We've converted suburban regions into ghettos of sterility and boredom, and in the process, we've destroyed millions of acres of prime agricultural land and natural landscape. He quotes an article which appeared in the New York Times in May of '71, in which a Mr. Eugene Raskin suggested that any effort to improve the functioning of city cores, such as Manhattan, is comparable to the act of beating a dead horse. He said, they are physically obsolete, financially unworkable, crime-ridden, garbage-strewn, polluted, torn by racial conflicts, wallowing in welfare, unemployment, despair, and official corruption. As they exist at present, they are unsalvageable, destined to join the dinosaur in deserved extinction. Urban planners and others who come up with temporary patchwork schemes and gimmicks to keep the cities going another year or 2 or 3 are as pathetic as the officers of the Titanic charting tomorrow's course while the water rises above their ears. Those who live in big city areas, who are in good financial situations, make tremendous sacrifices. They have to tolerate unbreathable air, undrinkable water, involuntary waste of time, public insecurity, filthy streets, and the complete severance of any contact with the expressions of nature, and fear for their lives and property. Yet in 10 years' time, it is now forecast that 73% of the total population will live in large cities or their environs. The number of cities with over 1 million inhabitants grows every year and now amounts to a total of 131. The number of those which have populations of between 5 and 10 million is impressive. On the basis of quantitative criteria, the city has never been so successful in the entire history of mankind. On the basis of qualitative criteria, however, the cities of our time are a disastrous failure. No wonder then, Victor Gruen writes, that everybody wants to escape the densely built-up core areas. The mass use of the automobile, growing incomes, shortened working hours, and extended leisure time encourage the mass flight and make it possible. But just because it is a mass flight, it is also a futile one. Those who want to settle in a lovely countryside must find out, much to their bewilderment, that once that hundreds of thousands of others who are also filled with the same desire have settled, there is no lovely countryside left. And Victor Gruen goes on to point out how city cores can be redeveloped, and the countryside can remain beautiful. You can get his entire lecture by just sending $1 to the Victor Gruen Foundation for Environmental Planning, 315 North Beverly Glen Boulevard, Los Angeles, California, 90024. But our remaining in such environments will not help them. As Lewis Mumford suggested, each one of us, as long as life stirs in him, may play a part in extricating himself from the power system by asserting his primacy as a person in quiet acts of mental or physical withdrawal. We can beat the problem through that most distasteful of all our activities, the intolerable labor of thought. Thinking with a definite purpose is or should be different from random casual thinking. When you're trying to solve a specific problem, the mind and its largely mysterious powers must be disciplined, directed. During the hour you set aside for thinking, have your major goal before you, written at the top of the page of a sheet of paper. Now the mind has to cease its idle playing in the fields and get in the harness and go to work. It must come up with possible solutions to the problem before it. It is the transfer agent that must deliver us from where we are to where we've decided we want to be. That may not involve a physical move from one point to another, or it well may. Researchers at UCLA found that for all practical purposes, it appears that the reach of the mind is infinite. And when they say the mind, they're talking about yours and mine. As you sit there with your goal before you and begin to try to come up with possible ways of reaching it, you'll notice a very sluggish reaction on the part of your thinking equipment at first. Creative people are familiar with this phenomenon. Like a child resting or at play, the mind resents being called to task and responds sluggishly like oil in sub-zero weather. Usually when it acts that way, most people simply let it go back to sleep. It has learned through many years of inactivity that hard work is not a part of life at all. Here it's important that you stay with it. Like doing push-ups for the first time, not much happens, and the results are disappointing, if not embarrassing. But daily effort soon finds us doing with ease what was at first difficult and awkward. Write down any thoughts the mind passes along. Do not be discouraged, no matter how trivial your first efforts may be, if you haven't done this before. You're prospecting an exceedingly rich soil, and it may come up with a strike the first time out. It isn't likely, but stay alert and examine with great care the ideas produced by your first sessions. Sometimes an idea which appears worthless at first can be turned around or inside out or combined with another idea to form a winner. Just as important as the ideas produced by these first sessions is the extremely important function you're performing. Each day as you look at your goal and begin your disciplined thinking, you're placing the idea of your goal in your subconscious mind. Like the incredibly rich soil it is, it accepts the idea as a seed. Planting the seed once in a single session will probably not plant the seed deep enough or guarantee its germination. The seed must be planted again and again before germination takes place and it begins to grow in the subconscious mind. And while you're trying to pull ideas out of the top of your mind, a far greater wisdom is going to work below the surface. These think sessions accomplish two important jobs. One, they force the mind into disciplined control and form the habit of disciplined thought, and produce ideas, some of which may be very good. And two, they plant the seed of your goal deep into your subconscious mind and cause it to germinate and take root. It's the second function that will virtually guarantee you're reaching your goal. You may later rue the day, but reach your goal you will. As someone has said, be choosy what it is you set your heart upon, for if you want it strongly enough, you'll get it. Here it all hinges on the wisdom and maturity of our decisions. Then, forcing the mind to think and come up with answers for a definite period of time every day sets the great subterranean forces to work. And they'll go on working all day while you're doing other things and all night long while you're sleeping. That's how you get the real hidden power of your mind and imagination to work. You've given it a specific job to do in the setting of your goal, and it can marshal massive, computer-like memory banks and countless extrapolations and permutations, trying a million possible pieces to the puzzle you've given it. And at the same time, another very subtle action is taking place. You're changing. Subtle shifts in your personality and attitudes, your manner, your whole being are underway as you're being readied for the accomplishment of your goal. And as you think about the goal you're working toward, it moves farther and farther into the realm of possibility. Gradually, instead of being what might at first have seemed like a little wild daydream, it begins to make more and more sense. It begins to take on legitimate, concrete form. And finally, one day when you least expect it, when the mind is at leisure, the idea will appear. It will slip into the edge of your consciousness so unobtrusively that like a sly party crasher, you will be only vaguely conscious of it. But then incredibly at first, then with mounting exhilaration, you'll see it for what it is, the idea you've been looking for. And if your goal is to live a simple, uncluttered life in some idyllic spot, you can achieve it. You can have your cake and you can eat it too. You can, through the use of your imagination, do what you want to do, where you want to do it. You are under no constraint other than habit and self-doubt to suffer in one part of your life for success in another part. You can succeed in all parts. For those who are not ready to begin uncomplicating their lives, there are a million things calling for attention, opportunities everywhere. Every listing in the yellow pages of the telephone directory represents a business opportunity because not one of the businesses listed is being operated as well as it can be, as it may one day be operated. At the same time, let's remember those worthwhile guidelines, quality and simplicity. It's really quite surprising what we can do without and still live a richly satisfying life. We've been engaged for some time now in a national debauch of senseless consumerism in this country. Just as we eat twice what we need for good health, we often purchase twice what we need in the way of things which end by owning us, tying us down, worrying us as we try to maintain or keep from losing them in one way or another. I think what we're seeking is freedom. Freedom from things, as well as the opinions of others. It's amazing how people love to complicate their lives. Several years ago, a friend of mine played a trick on his wife that changed her life and his too. Over the years, his wife had formed the habit, and it's an easy one to form for a man or a woman, of shouting at the children in the morning if he tried to head them off to school. She screamed at them to get up and get dressed, to come to breakfast, to get ready for school, to catch the bus. It was a scene no doubt duplicated in thousands, perhaps millions of homes every morning. But it left my friend John, his wife, and the children pretty badly shaken every morning, with nerves jangling and a great desire to get as far from that house as possible in the shortest possible time. Each morning, John found himself heaving a sigh of relief as he left the wild confusion and noise of his home for the relative quiet of the drive to the office. And on one such drive, he got an idea that he felt might help subdue somewhat the nerve-shattering cacophony of his mornings. So the next morning, without his wife's knowledge, John hid a tape recorder and microphone in the kitchen with the volume turned up. All through the frenetic tableau of shouting and imprecations, the silent machine recorded every word, every sound. Then, when the children had gone off and his wife was sitting limply in her chair with a cup of coffee, getting her breath back from her morning drill master duties, John played it back to her. For a few moments, his wife looked at him in curious amazement. Then she suddenly realized that the strident, shouting, barking, unhappy voice was her own. For the first time, she heard herself as she sounded each morning to her husband and children. Her face flamed with wounded embarrassment as the awful sound of her own voice again filled the kitchen. And long before it was over, she had put her head in her arms and was crying her heart out. John turned off the tape recorder and put his arm around her, and when she raised her tear-streaked face to look at him, it was filled with resolve, and she said quietly, "John, I'll never make another sound like that as long as I live." The next morning, the neighbors must have thought this family had left town. The children were dumbfounded but delighted. Their mother was smiling happily. She spoke to them in normal, well-modulated tone. Everything went off like clockwork. And when the children, still dazed by the smiling stranger who looked like their mother, had left for school, John and his wife sat smiling over their coffee. He later said she told him that she'd never be able to thank him enough for bringing home that tape recorder. The great majority of people haven't the faintest idea of the image they project for the world to see and hear. That's why football coaches show their players the films of the preceding week's game. If you want to improve your golf, get someone to videotape your swing. See yourself as you really look, and you can see where you can improve, where you can perhaps slow down and become steadier, more rhythmical. But if you want to have some fun, surreptitiously record the voices of your family at mealtime. That includes your own. You'll all find it a very interesting experience, and it can be hilariously funny. Some time back, Thomas J. Fleming wrote a piece for Life magazine that had to do with an interview he had with Dr. Frederick J. Godet, director of the Laboratory of Psychological Studies at Stevens Institute of Technology. Dr. Godet is an expert on labor problems and absenteeism. Through his studies, it seems that Dr. Godet has become intimately familiar with germs, their oddities and strange habits. He discovered, for example, that germs can feel and act. He said studies showed germs can tell one day of the week from another. They're aware of payroll accounting procedures and can even tell if an employee is happy or not, or if a boss is a kind or mean person. The doctor learned all of this while working on the problem of absenteeism, which costs the nation something in the neighborhood of $7 billion a year. It was discovered, for example, that while humans work a 5-day week with the weekend off, germs work just the reverse. Thursdays and Fridays are virtually germ-free days in industry, but the germs really go to work over the weekend and lay low hundreds of thousands of employees who don't show up on Monday. Yet in certain companies, the germs lay low on Thursdays, but go after the employees on Fridays. It was found that these companies paid on Thursday instead of Friday. Another curious fact was noted. Companies with liberal payment policies for absences due to illness had a 50% higher illness rate than companies with restricted sick leave policies. It was also discovered that germs head for the hills when management begins doing some serious research into the cause of illness, and that new employees, on a 6-month probationary period, were virtually left alone by germs. But as soon as they were permanently hired, with their jobs secure and their psyches well adjusted to company routine, the germs suddenly attacked at the same rate that they attacked old-timers in the company. And it was found that germs are passionately attracted to departments and companies with tough bosses constantly breathing down the necks of employees. One large company found that the absences due to illness varied from 2% to 17%, depending upon the type of boss. Dr. Goodday also discovered that there's a certain type of person to whom germs are particularly attracted. They're people who are defensive, suspicious, and somewhat hostile. They're usually not well liked by their supervisors, and they reciprocate this dislike. They don't make friends easily and are regarded as loners. It's amazing how often they get sick. On the other hand, germs seem to avoid the sort who make friends easily, are outward-going and capable of numerous emotional attachments. These are the people you can depend upon to show up on Monday mornings. They seem to have a built-in germ repellent. And the doctor recommends that we have all-star games, Christmas, New Year's, the World Series, and national elections only on weekends. We know germs are active on weekends, so we have nothing to lose. And it seems that if a company will do a little research into the activities of its germs and the sort of people it has in management positions, it might increase its productivity considerably. Here's a wonderful way to avoid an argument. Simply ask questions. Instead of jumping in and disagreeing before you know any more about the subject under discussion than the other party, ask the other person to state his case specifically and to define his terms. People who like to argue and will at the drop of a word on any subject are people who enjoy ruffling the feelings of others. Willis Sloane once wrote an article entitled "Arguments Don't Win Friends," in which he points out that arguments are useless and largely ridiculous. They're more a matter of temper than temperate conversation and discussion. Subjects such as politics and religion can almost always provoke an argument. Racial prejudices can bring forth the most ridiculous statements in the form of arguments for or against certain practices. But if you'll apply this rule, to make your opponent be specific about some point you know backward and forward, you may avoid a foolish and endless, where nobody wins kind of argument. I've found that an argument like a potential highway accident can generally be spotted from some distance away, and it can be avoided the same way. Slow down and approach with caution. In conversation, as in your car, the worst dangerous speed. It's pretty hard to get seriously hurt going 10 miles an hour, and you can avoid a serious argument that could lead to a lot of heartache by just being extremely careful when you come upon a situation that's likely to erupt into a serious argument. If someone makes a statement that you feel is wrong or ridiculous, you should not remain silent. As you feel the adrenaline pumping into your system, instead of jumping on the other person with both feet, just ask, "Why do you say that?" If you get another absurd generalization, ask, "Would you mind being specific about that?" Ask questions such as why. How do you know? Instead of trying to prove your opponent wrong, make him prove himself right or discredit himself, which he will promptly do if he's skating on thin ice. Put the burden of proof where it belongs, on the shoulders of the person who started it. Then you can sit back calmly and enjoy yourself while he gets in over his head, flounders in the swamp for a while, and finally tries to change the subject. No argument, and he won't be so quick to start another one the next time. Robert McNamara, one of the nation's top executives, asks why, whenever something is proposed, even if he is immediately against the proposal, he wants all the facts. Perhaps he's been wrong about it, and if he's right, he forces the person making the proposal to prove its merit. And no one can even guess at the number of families living between arguments in a state of unnecessary and uneasy truce. Since it takes two to argue, let's make sure we're not one of them. All we need say is, "Why do you say that?" Or, exactly what do you mean by what you just said? What is your proof? Keep the ball and the pressure on the person who is driving recklessly. It works like a charm, and you come out of it looking professional, wise, and level-headed. Thank you. Imagination is everything. I can't remember who wrote those three words in that order, but it seems he summed up it all. Imagination is everything. Our lives will reflect the way we use our imagination. The child imagines himself walking like the adults he sees above him. As soon as he can walk, he wants to run. As we reach successive plateaus in life, we begin to imagine ourselves reaching the next one. And thus our imaginations lead us on from one idea to another through every day and every year of our lives. If we're not careful, Our imaginations can lead us into mazes of confused complications from which we may find it difficult to extricate ourselves. So it's a good idea, as we use our imagination, to always strive for simplicity, to avoid the complicated. Remember the three main departments of living: family, how we spend our days, work and leisure, and income. If we're wise, we'll work toward keeping each as uncomplicated as possible, as interesting and as rewarding as possible, but at the same time, simple and straightforward. Are we living the lives we want to live, or are we living stereotyped lives based on phony values? Usually they're a combination of both, a kind of compromise which says surely other people must have some idea of what constitutes the good life. After all, there are so many of them. But when we look closer, we see that they're living shadow lives, as Mumford calls them. In competition ice skating, you've seen a couple match each other's movements almost perfectly. It's called shadow skating, I believe. They try to match each other's movements so perfectly that each might be the other's shadow. In any sort of neighborhood, you will tend to find people living much the same way. Their homes, landscaping, furnishings, and lives are typified, if by anything at all, by an almost total lack of imagination. Imagination, like anything else, needs fuel for production. You can't have something from nothing. Thomas Edison said, "I'm a sponge. I want to know the answer to everything." With his great lifetime inventory of information, he could assemble an incredible array of new combinations and permutations. Electric light is a combination of elements, and so is any good idea, or any bad idea for that matter. Most of us make the mistake of not asking why. Why do I live here, in this house, rather than in some other house? Why this life instead of another life? Why this work instead of other work? Why these rewards instead of others? Now, this doesn't mean we'll change anything necessarily, but at least we'll be living lives that have been examined and found to be to our personal liking. We'll know that we're not living the lives we're living simply because they reflect and are pretty much composite copies of the lives we see about us. They should be, to my way of thinking, deep main currents in our lives: our family lives, our work and our leisure, and our rewards in the form of income. Our family lives should be good and richly satisfying. What is our input here? How are we using our imaginations to bring meaning, charm, and love to our family relationships? It's an ongoing process that should become richer and more meaningful with the passing of time. As we grow older, we should come to love each other more, instead of it being the other way around. Imagination can bring this about, making allowances for unmanageable neuroses or even psychoses that may crop up. I've often thought of producing appointment calendars with weekly reminders that we should think of something interesting to do for those we love, to let them know we don't take them for granted. A dinner out, a weekend trip, flowers, a card, a phone call, a gift, maybe nothing more than a big hug and the words, "I love you very much." The 5 most important words in the language when arranged in that order. Or planning a really interesting vacation 6 or 8 months in advance, instead of waiting until the last minute and finding yourself with nothing very interesting to do. How about your home? Is it what you want? H.L. Mencken once commented that the average home is a house of horrors and doesn't reflect poor taste so much as it reflects no taste at all. People tend to order their steaks medium, and their homes and lives the same way. Medium rhymes with tedium. The family is the most important part of the life of most of us. What good is accomplishment if there's no one with whom to share it? What good is anything if there's no one with whom to share it? And since the family is first in importance, it represents a fertile field for the imagination, not just for the woman in the family, but for the man, and hopefully the kids as well. Family creative thinking sessions are a lot of fun, and a never-ending source of good ideas. Check every idea for basic simplicity. Avoid complication whenever possible. Next, imagination as it applies to the way we spend our days, our work, and our leisure. Let's take them in order. No matter what it is we want, if it's within the realm of reality, we can get it through imagination applied to our work. Nothing now being done by man is being done the way it can and will be. Everything will be done much better. That can be, will be, whether it's the result of our applied imagination or not. People who resist change in their work are impediments to progress, yet the first words the new person on the job usually hears are, "Now this is the way it's done around here." A business leader made the comment that if we're doing anything this year the way it was done last year, we're obsolete. Now that's an extreme generalization, but deserves careful attention. In most things it's true. Now, while getting new ideas in business is usually the best way to guarantee unpopularity, it's still the only way to renewal and growth. People resist new ideas from the top to the bottom of an organization, especially if it's an older organization. Championing a new idea is a lonely business. But if you believe it's a good idea, if your research causes you to believe it will be of significant benefit, and the costs and disruption necessary to test the idea are not completely out of line with its ultimate benefits, then fight it through. Do it as diplomatically as you can, make as few enemies as possible, but fight it through if you believe in it. The object of management is not to be loved by the people in the organization. It's to make things happen most profitably for all concerned, particularly the customer. People historically have stood in the way of virtually every good idea, and especially if it isn't theirs. Your good ideas can lead to your dismissal from an organization. But ideas are more important than a job. With good ideas, you have independence. There's always a way to succeed. A friend of mine found he couldn't get his ideas through the board of directors. He resigned, and beginning at about the age of 60, he built a $300 million a year business on his rejected ideas. Walt Disney used to ask 10 people what they thought of a new idea. If they were unanimous in their rejection of it, he would begin working on it immediately. Our world today consists of thousands of things people once thought were impossible. How many good ideas have you followed through to completion in your work during the past year? A business whose very beginning and success were based on innovative imagination will become a model of stodgy convention with a few years of good profits. You know, Arnold Palmer's success as a truly great golfer was based on his ability to never try to play it too safely, too cozy. He was never foolhardy, but he would try the more testing shot when others would have played it safe. He lost some tournaments as a result, but he won a great many and achieved world fame and respect, too. There's much to be said for the conservation of assets, but it should be remembered that they tend to slow you down and put more emphasis on saving what you've got than on building for the future. Of course, there's a happy balance between conservation and innovation that should never be lost sight of. Ask yourself, what business am I in? What is its purpose? How does it contribute to the well-being of mankind? And how can I make it better? Not how can we produce more necessarily. We have almost overproduced ourselves into a world junk pile. In trying to produce more and more, many businesses have lost sight of real quality. Quantity became the god, with a small increment of profit on mountain ranges of units, gadgets, shiny junk that fell apart when the purchaser got it home, knobs that broke or fell off, buttons that came off, toys that couldn't stand the strain of being unwrapped. Towering mountain ranges of shiny, worthless junk, none of it worth our time, let alone our money. There's a rapidly growing avant-garde that will one day represent the majority of the population that is determined to buy quality, and they'll go to any country to get it. We can satisfy this growing, discriminating market now and in the years ahead. Many of our fastest-growing companies are proving it, but it means going back to the old verity. Quality first, quantity second. Both can be achieved through human imagination, the most incredible agency ever to appear on Earth. It all comes back to what we want, and more importantly, what we want to be as persons. A good profit and a steady growth is all that we need in business. We don't have to shoot off the top of the page. But the chances of truly spectacular growth are better via quality through imagination than through quantity for quantity's sake. It makes no difference whether it's a yo-yo or an automobile. Over the long haul, quality will win out. If the size must be reduced to maintain price and improve quality, we should make it smaller. There's always a way through imagination. You know, each of us has a gold mine between his ears. If he fails to mine the gold, well, that's his business. But it's there, all that we can want, and much more. Now, as to input, we should never stop building our store of information. We can never get an idea without raw material, which is information and application. If there's real talent there too, so much the better, but talent has a way of developing with hard application, daily application, perspiration, long hours of study and deep thought. Become a sponge for information that applies to what you do. Read everything you can find on the subject. Build a fine library of books that are filled with the ideas of others on your specialty, whatever it may be. You know, my wife is a great cook. She must have 30 cookbooks. People who say they're great cooks without ever reading the ideas of others are kidding themselves. I know a writer who refuses to read the works of other writers. He's never amounted to much. Great painters have always learned more from other painters than they did from nature, and they still do. Somerset Maugham laboriously copied the style of writers he admired. I mean, he would sit and copy page after page of the actual words they wrote, so that he could learn how they wrote. He then wrote the stories he wanted to write, with a marvelously finished skill. If we're in management, we can learn from the masters in management. Laura Hibler and Vogel's book on management, and the new Dow Jones-Irwin book, The Enjoyment of Management by John Price, are a couple of good ones to study. You know, when I first started in radio, I listened carefully to the country's best and highest-paid radio personalities. They had learned their skills through many years of hard work. I learned a great deal from them. All I had to do was turn on my radio and listen. Frank Sinatra learned his amazing breath control from Tommy Dorsey, and every great performer who ever lived has had a model or models he or she studied and admired and wanted to emulate. How about you? The person who thinks he doesn't have to study his craft, art, or profession is a pompous fool, and his chances of ever amounting to much are very slim indeed. A never-ending taking in of the best thoughts of the best people in the field of our choice is the best assurance that we will never stagnate, never stop producing. Paracelsus wrote, "Thoughts are free and are subject to no rules. On them rests the freedom of man, and they tower above the light of nature. For thoughts give birth to a creative force that is neither elemental or sidereal. Thoughts create a new heaven, a new firmament, a new source of energy from which new arts flow. When man undertakes to create something, he establishes a new heaven, as it were, and from it the work that he desires to create flows into him. For such is the immensity of man that he is greater than heaven and earth." He went on to write, "The child is still an uncertain being, and he receives his form according to the potentialities that you awaken in him. If you awaken his ability to make shoes, he'll be a shoemaker. If you awaken the stone cutter in him, he'll be a stone cutter. And if you summon forth the scholar in him, he will be a scholar. And this can be so because all the potentialities are inherent in him. What you awaken in him comes forth from him. The rest remains unawakened, absorbed in sleep. We are born to be awake, not to be asleep." And then he wrote, "Therefore, man, learn and learn, question and question, and do not be ashamed of it. For only thus can you earn a name that will resound in all countries and never be forgotten." Hope is one of the loftiest emotions we can experience, for whenever we lack hope, our fruits will also be lacking. He who knows nothing loves nothing. He who can do nothing understands nothing. He who understands nothing is worthless. But he who understands also loves, notices, sees. The more knowledge is inherent in a thing, the greater the love. Everything lies in knowledge. From it comes every fruit. Knowledge bestows faith, for he who knows God believes in him. He who does not know him does not believe in him. Everyone believes in what he knows. Everyone believes in what he knows. And there's your answer to the question, why is there so little belief in anything today? It's because we believe in what we know, and most people don't try to really know anything. Do you know where I got those great quotations of Paracelsus? From the book The Nature of Man, which I recommended in Direct Line 1. People who say they don't have time for reading, research, and study had better find time or throw in the towel. There's no other way to make it over the long haul. You can't make wine without grapes. There must be input if there's to be output. A time spent each day in study will produce a never-ending stream of interesting, imaginative ideas we can apply to our work. It will also confer upon us a very precious thing, freedom, complete independence. We can live where we please, earn the income we desire, and have a wonderful life through the systematic development of our imagination. Imagination is everything. What applies to our work also applies to our leisure, our hobbies, avocations. If we play golf or tennis, it's much more enjoyable if we play well. Again, a systematic, never-ending study of the game or sport will keep our ability and enthusiasm growing over the years. We don't have to become obsessed with it or be a professional, but it's great to develop confidence and a real facility for the fun we enjoy: boating, fishing, skiing, flying, tennis, golf, bridge, whatever it is. It's more fun if we're fairly good at it. Working at our hobbies gives us the rest we need from the problems at work and at home. It helps us live in balance with a minimum of friction. You know, scientists are in agreement that the old biblical admonition is correct when it says, "He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that keepeth his spirit is greater than he that taketh a city." If we can catch the vision that life is lived from within out, that it's not so much what happens around us or to us as what happens in us that counts, we can set our own pace, live our own lives, meet situations and people objectively without fear or resistances, and we can become healthier and as prosperous and happy as we want to be. Anyone who knows anything about mechanics knows that friction is the enemy. Steel wheels on rails reduce friction almost to the vanishing point, and an enormous, almost unbelievable load can be moved great distances with surprisingly little power. I had dinner in a restaurant in San Antonio the other night at the top of that great tower that was built for the hemisphere, and the owner of the restaurant told me that that entire thing turns with a 1.5 horsepower motor. Steel, frictionless balls working on steel rails. We can do the same by reducing friction from our lives. The more friction, the slower we must move with greater effort. Some men in medical research go so far as to say that man has within him a health-maintaining force sufficient to keep him alive and healthy almost indefinitely, if it were not for the destructive effect of uncontrolled emotions. As James Allen wrote, the calm man, having learned how to govern himself, knows how to adapt himself to others, and they in turn reverence his strength and feel they can learn from him and rely upon him. In all the departments of living, developing calmness, serenity, is worth any effort. It typifies the great person, the true professional. It takes daily practice, especially if we're not a naturally calm or phlegmatic kind of person. The calm person moves ahead. People just naturally look to him for leadership, especially when things aren't going as they should. But not enough has been said about the contributions calmness makes to good health. Good health in man, as it is in all living things, is the natural state. The body has fail-safe mechanisms that automatically go to work whenever good health is threatened. Ill health comes more often from emotional stress than anyone even dares to guess. Friction is the culprit. Developing serenity, a calm, peaceful attitude toward others, our work, and our goals will work wonders in the response we'll get. So we should calm down, slow down, and with a little discrimination as to what we allow to get through to us, we can do much more and enjoy ourselves much more with much less friction and effort. When we wake in the morning, there are 1,000 distractions poised to get at us as we go through the day. They clamor at us in sound and sight. They're frantic, frenetic. They implore, they importune, they threaten, they cajole. If we'd let them, they'd keep us spinning like confused tops. We need to put a sentry at the door to our consciousness and look at the credentials of that which would enter. We can suffer from inner pollution, too. We should be choosy what we let enter our consciousness, as choosy as we are about the furnishings in our homes. A great educator once said something to the effect that the most interesting people are the people with the most interesting pictures in their minds. If you will think of the things that clamor for your attention as paintings waiting to hang on your walls, you can become very selective. A salesman was talking to a farmer who was very much interested in what he was selling. He was standing in the shade of a tree near the house when the sound of the telephone's ringing reached them. The farmer made no attempt to leave. Finally, the salesman mentioned that the phone was ringing, and the farmer commented that he'd had that thing installed for his convenience, not for anyone else's, and went on with the conversation. There is a way to restore charm and interest to our lives, and it seems to be to cut down on the number of things we let engage our attention and make certain that what does get through is good. I had the good fortune to be raised near a harbor. As a kid, I used to spend hours down the docks watching the ships loading and unloading. They'd bring in cargoes from the distant and romantic ports all over the world, and I used to stand there with a faraway look in my eyes, envying those sailors who were so fortunate. They traveled over the distant horizon to places I could only imagine or read about in my geography books. I hung around so much that some of the mates and skippers finally recognized me and actually invited me on board. I guess you can imagine the heaven that was for me. They'd take me from the engine room to the forecastle and find it the place I liked best, the navigation bridge. The bridge had the best view, but more than that, it was there that the ship was controlled and steered in all those distant places I dreamed of. Once I was even invited to lunch. I didn't get over that for months. It's strange how something like that can have such an overwhelming fascination for a youngster and exert such an influence over his life. As soon as I was old enough, I was on a ship, and I sailed to quite a few of those distant deep-water ports. No matter how long the trip, I never got tired of sailing and watching the sea in all its different moods. Entering a distant port, even if I'd been there before, was always a brand-new thrill. Over the years, I've tried to figure out why I like ships so much, and I believe I've come up with the answer. Ships operate during their entire lives the way we should, but so few do. Maybe you've never thought much about it, but at any given moment, a ship is 100% successful. That is, it's either sailing to a predetermined port of call, or it's in port getting ready to sail to another one. A ship owner is smart. He knows a ship can only reach one port of call at a time. You never see any doubt or confusion, or trying to do more than one thing at a time. You can climb up to the navigation bridge of a big far-sailing ship and ask the captain where he's going, and he'll tell you instantly and in one sentence. How many people do you know who can do the same thing? It seems that most people want so many different things, most of which they're not really sure of, that they're like the guy who jumped on their horse and rode off in all directions at once. What they ought to do is recognize the truth and success of a ship. Pick one port that's important. Sail to it. Then rest and refit for a little while, then sail to another important port. In this way, in not too many years, a man can set and reach his goals one by one until finally he's got a tremendous pile of accomplishments in which he can take pride. He's got all the things he wants, just because he had sense enough to realize he could only do well one thing at a time. There's one other point that fits in here, and maybe it's the most important of all. If a ship tied up to a dock, for some reason had no place to go, it would stay there until it fell apart from rust and disuse. Ships don't start their engines until they have some place to go, and here again it's the same with men. This is why it's so important that each of us have a port of call we want to reach, a goal, a place to get to that we feel would be better than the place in which we now find ourselves. If we don't, well, we might never cast off. We might never know the thrill of sailing a pre-charted course to a place we can't see for fully 99% of the journey. But we know it's there, and we know that if we keep sailing toward it, we'll reach it. You see, ships have a way of reaching their ports. If someone came up to you today and asked you what your next port of call is, that is, where you're going, could you answer him in one sentence like the captain could on the bridge of his ship? If not, maybe you'd better give it some thought. As soon as I was able and had the time to devote to it, I got a boat of my own. I find it to be a wonderfully restful hobby. With a good boat, you can own a home anywhere on Earth. Since 76% of the Earth's surface is covered by water, there are a few places you can go if you happen to love boats as I do. With our little ship, we have a home in Florida, the Bahamas, the Virgin Islands, the Grenadines, South America, Central America, or Mexico. It can take us wherever we want to go, with no packing and unpacking, with our meals when we want them, and good fishing and swimming along the way. And as Dana wrote back in 1830 in the American Classic 2 years before the mast, a ship is like a lady's watch, always out of repair. So you're never at a loss for something to do. There are always a dozen things waiting to be done. It makes for an interesting, busy hobby, with lots of fresh air and sunshine. It's especially good in the winter when you can't play golf up north. The late William James, in his Principles of Psychology, defined genius as little more than the faculty of perceiving in an inhabitual way. In his essay on habit, he referred to habit as the flywheel of society. It's what keeps us doing what we've been doing in the past. It makes us fear change regardless of the present condition of our lives. And the genius, as defined by Dr. James, seems to be that rare bird who knows that change is not only good, but inevitable. He anticipates the inevitable. He's perhaps what makes change inevitable. He habitually looks at everything about him in an unhabitual way. He takes nothing for granted. He knows that whatever he sees that is made by man or served by man is imperfect, is always in a state of evolving. Let me give you a good example. A friend of mine was looking for a site for a large luxury motel. He was in no hurry and spent months in a certain West Coast city looking for the site that would probably best guarantee a good return on the considerable amount of money he was going to invest and borrow. He found the perfect site. It was near a large university and at the confluence of 5 main roads, one of which was a heavily traveled highway. It was also within the city limits, which would mean a large local trade with the restaurant. There was only one hitch. On the site was an old brick building, an old manufacturing concern, still in business. Well, he called on the owners of the business and told them what he wanted to do. Since the city had, over the years, grown around the old building, he pointed out that it would be to their benefit to sell him the property at a price many times the land's original value, and build themselves a new, more modern plant in a less congested area. Well, they saw the sense of his plan, and a way to pick up nearly $500,000 for their property, and closed the deal. He raised the old building and built his beautiful new motel. Later, he discovered that many people in the motel business had looked upon that site as ideal for their purposes, but had written it off because it was already occupied. He saw it not with the old brick manufactory on it, but instead with his beautiful new motel sitting there. He had looked at that corner in an unhabitual way. Everybody benefited, including the community, by his genius. I think each of us can greatly increase the value of his life by taking to heart Dr. James' definition of genius, by looking at things about us, in our homes, and particularly in our work, with new eyes, with the eyes of creation. We can form the habit of seeing things not as they are, but as they perhaps will be, as they could be, as our changing world will insist they be in the future. Our lives are full of old brick buildings that have stood there for too long. We just don't see them anymore, or if we do, we just assume they'll always be there, and maybe they always will, if we don't do something about them. In case the idea impressed you as much as it did me, here's Dr. William James' definition of genius again. You might want to remember it. Genius is little more than the faculty of perceiving in an unhabitual way. Speaking of Dr. William James, he also had something to say about the interesting phenomenon known as second wind. In his essay on vital reserves, he points out that everyone knows what it is to start a piece of work, mental or physical, feeling stale, and we know what it is to warm up to a job. But before too long, we feel the first signs of fatigue. As Dr. James put it, we have then walked, played, or worked enough, so we desist, we simply quit. This sort of fatigue forms a kind of barrier behind which the great majority of people live and work. But if an unusual necessity forces us to press onward, as James put it, a surprising thing happens. The fatigue gets worse up to a certain critical point, then gradually or suddenly it passes away, and we're fresher than before. We have evidently tapped a level of new energy, a second wind, masked until then by the fatigue obstacle we usually obey. In fact, we may find that we have third and fourth winds. The phenomenon occurs in cases of mental activity as well as physical, and in exceptional cases we may find beyond the very extremity of fatigue, distress, stores of ease and power we never dreamed ourselves to own. It's evident that we have stockpiled reserves of energy that are ordinarily not called upon, but that may be called upon, deeper and deeper strata of power, ready for use by anyone who probes so deeply. I remember one Sunday when I had to write 20 radio programs to be recorded on Monday. I got started at 9 in the morning, and by 5 in the afternoon I was bushed, but I had 10 more shows to write, so I kept at it. Suddenly, I felt better and had more energy than at any previous time, and by 1:30 the next morning, when I finally completed program number 20, I felt great. I felt I could keep going forever. 16.5 hours of steady mental work and typing, and I was fresher than when I started. Great things are done by so-called high-energy people, but I'm sure most of us don't know about or forget about the great reserves of energy which lie dormant in us. Each of us has a tremendous second wind, mentally and physically. Passing through the fatigue barrier to reach these deep reservoirs can make the difference between ordinary or unusual success, between existing and really living.